All right. So, hello everybody, and today we have our next session, which I suppose will be extremely interesting and substantial. And today's speaker is Konstantin Degtyaryov, who is a human rights professor, human rights law professor at the Liverpool University, Great Britain, but he is originally, as far as I know, from Belarus. So this is also the representation of one of our partnering countries in this project. And we are really honored, Konstantin, to have you here today, knowing how busy you are and how intensive your schedule is. So I won't take any more of your time and gladly invite you to proceed.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for joining me this afternoon. It's still afternoon in the United Kingdom, where I'm located at the moment. So, hello from Liverpool, and so basically, I have been introduced already, so I'm not gonna spend more time on that. I just wanted to mention that my key area, the area of my expertise, is the European Convention on Human Rights. And therefore, my presentation today will be predominantly focused on the convention itself, because it is my favorite pet topic, as we say. And I'm hoping that I will not be too boring for those of you, especially who, if your country is not a member of the Council of Europe, and I know that Belarus is one of them, and Belarus obviously is not the member of the Council of Europe, and obviously cannot apply to the European Court of Human Rights. However, having said all that, I have to say that actually the standards of human rights protection, at least they are supposed to be similar in all major systems of human rights protection, namely the Council of Europe and the UN human rights system. Now, my plan is, and please correct me if this is something that is not traditionally the case in these seminars. I will try to give you some interactive lecture, so to speak, for about like 45-50 minutes. Maybe longer, maybe shorter, will depend. And then we will open the floor for discussion. And then I will switch into Russian. As far as I understand, Russian is a little bit more familiar to, or I see the thumb up from the organizers, so that's a good sign. And then I will switch into Russian, and we will be able to discuss various issues which crop up, which actually emerge when we talk about freedom of assembly and association. I think that I can see the chat function here. So if you have a question, comment, or anything related of that sort, and you want me to react immediately, please send your comments there. I will try to react as quickly as possible. Now, if nobody has any questions or comments at the moment, let me then get started. I understand that there are representatives, we have representatives of many countries here, and I will try to make it applicable to all of you. But I also was told that I shouldn't be extremely, detailed and technical. So I will try to give you sort of a bird's view of the European Convention on Human Rights, of how the European Convention on Human Rights deals with this right, with the right of assembly and association. And obviously, I don't want to start by saying this usual stuff that people say, how important right to freedom of assembly and association is for democracy, and that is the core right for effective democratic representative regime. But this is kind of obvious. The European Court of Human Rights has said on a number of occasions that democracy is the only regime that is possible to coincide with human rights. So basically, human rights and democracy, although in theory they are quite different in their nature, they can exist together, maybe not exclusively, but very often they go hand in hand. So let me just introduce you what I'm going to discuss today. And if I get to my slides, give me a second. That's it. All right, let me tell you what I'm going to discuss today. And first of all, we'll look into the introduction. Can I ask anyone like who is on Zoom at the moment to mute their microphones unless they want to tell something? If that is the case,
Muted.
okay, perfect. So first of all, as I said, right to associations and all issues connected to this right is enshrined in Article 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights. For those of you who are familiar with the convention, this is something that you know very well, and usually an individual right is located in one of the articles from Article 2 to Article 12 of the convention. Now, so I will try to look and to read this article with you, and then we will discuss what this article actually means and how it can be applied in practice. And then I want to actually emphasize that this right is twofold. It contains two quite distinct rights that are enshrined in this particular article. First of all, it's right of assembly, right? Freedom of assembly means freedom to gather together and present something, right? We will discuss what that can be, but this is like a right to physically come together and to push for a particular political agenda or social agenda, etc., etc. However, so freedom of assembly is one part of this article. The second part of this article, which can be logically and analytically distinguished from the first part, is freedom of association. And although usually Article 11 is one right, it can be divided in these two parts. Yeah, freedom of assembly, that we can go outside and protest against something, and freedom of association. We can create a union, yeah, that would push strategically for a particular outcome. And in this context, I will be talking about political parties. But the European Court of Human Rights in this context doesn't only talk about political parties, it also covers various different issues, including non-governmental organizations, like organizations that are pushing for a particular cause, like Greenpeace. I don't know, Amnesty International would fall within this, or Human Rights House would also be considered one of those organizations. However, not everything is covered by freedom of association. For example, governmental associations would not be covered. For instance, I don't know, like lawyers unions, like bar associations, wouldn't be covered by freedom of association. Like police station, like universities, I don't know, factories, they would probably not fall under Article 11 in this particular aspect. But let's discuss it a little bit later. We have quite a bit of different things to discuss now. And first of all, let's actually read the Article 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And there is a relevant article of the International Covenant on Human and Civil and Political Rights. So Article 11 tells us that everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and to freedom of association with others, including the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of his interests, right? Now, that is the right, and as it is very common in relation to rights like this right is not absolute. Yeah, what is the difference between absolute and non-absolute right? Probably you have already been told that absolute right is the right that can never be restricted. It can never be interfered with. For example, right not to be tortured is one of those absolute rights. So effectively, absolute rights, as soon as we establish, we meaning the court or I don't know, any other tribunal, as soon as the court establishes that there is an interference of the state into this right, then this right is violated, right? So for absolute rights, interference means violation. Okay. For qualified rights, for so to speak, limitable rights, rights that can be limited, interference doesn't mean violation. Yeah. For example, here we can restrict freedom of assembly. We can restrict freedom of association. We can even ban a particular, I'm saying the state can ban a particular party and still be within the framework of right to freedom of assembly and association. So interference can be legal. However, the legality of this interference will depend on what was done by the state and how it was done and what are the justifications for what has been done. And answers to this question one can find in section 2 of Article 11. So in this article, it says that no restrictions shall be placed on the exercise of these rights, meaning rights to freedom of assembly and association, other than such that are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society, in the interest of national security, public safety, for the prevention of disorder or crime, for the protection of health or morals, or for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. This article should not prevent the imposition of lawful restrictions on the exercise of these rights by members of the armed forces, of the police, or the administration of the state. Okay. Now, what we can see in this part of the article is the principle of proportionality. Yeah. This test of proportionality is what the court usually applies to the cases that it is dealing with, right? What it means? It means that the interference with the right to freedom of assembly and association should be proportionate. Yeah, and proportionality is it's a big test and unfortunately, I don't have time to go into all tiny details of this test. It's very interesting and fascinating. It includes it includes a number of steps, right? It starts by deciding whether there was an interference at all. It then asks whether interference was legal, meaning lawful from the point of view of the national law. Then it looks whether this was trying to pursue a legitimate aim. Then it would look into whether it's necessary in democratic society. And finally, we would look into proportionality stricto sensu. But like we would deal with this particular aspect a little bit later. Okay. If you have any questions, please let me know. Since I don't see any questions, I would assume that there are no questions. Or you can save your questions until the end of this presentation. Okay, let's start analyzing Article 11. So here we have, as I already mentioned, we have two distinct rights, which is right to freedom of assembly and right to freedom of association. Now, as I said, interference is possible with this particular right. However, in order for this interference to be legal, it needs to be justified. And this justification is enshrined in Article 11, paragraph 2, and it should be prescribed by law. By law, I mean national law. It should have a legitimate law itself needs to be of a particular quality. So you cannot arbitrarily prohibit some specific rights to freedom of assembly. You need to have predictable and not extremely intrusive law. So not all law would be in compliance with the convention. Then we need to talk about legitimate aim. And what are those legitimate aims in accordance to which the state can interfere? Well, there is a list that is mentioned in Article 11, paragraph 2. We already mentioned it's national security, public order, health and safety, morality, etc., etc. And then we need to discuss whether it is necessary in democratic society, whether it is proportioned, right? So in one of the interesting cases, and I think that you're familiar with this case, is the case of Alexeyev and Russia. This case was about prohibition or ban on gay pride parades in Moscow. So this parade was banned in Moscow, and the government was arguing that actually the justification for this ban is not because they are so homophobic or they don't like gays or something like this, but because they wouldn't be able to protect the participants of this pride parade from those people who are against who are homophobic, who are against gays, etc., etc., and therefore they, in order to protect the participants of those of that gay pride parade, they decided to ban it. Well, the European Court of Human Rights considered this issue and decided that this is not a good argument, that it is not necessary in democratic society, right? It's an extreme reaction to this issue. There are plenty of other options for the state. They could provide more security to this area, add more police, etc., etc., rather than prohibiting this particular activity. Okay. So that's the very brief, quick overview of this article. So let's discuss what is actually assembly. Yeah. We talked about that a little bit, but I would like to actually emphasize more on what assembly includes. And the European Court of Human Rights said that it would not consider this term restrictively. The court actually includes very many different issues, many different forms of assembly into this definition. So it includes all public and private meetings, yeah, all marches, demonstrations, and they are not restricted to political demonstrations. Yeah, so it's not only assemblies with political agenda. It can be also social gathering, for example, assembling for a hunt, or there were a couple of cases from Azerbaijan related to social claims, social demands, and the court also accepted that it is a form of assembly. Also, kind of passive protest, like sit-ins in army barracks, were considered a part of assembly. So the court accepts broad variety of different forms of assembly. Uh, um, it's interesting to decide to establish, and it's important to establish the relationship with Article 10 of the Convention, which is right to freedom of expression. Yeah. So inevitably, when you go and protest, you exercise your freedom of speech, maybe not in the form of speech, but in the form of some sort of expression. When you go with a placard saying something like, I don't know, Putin should go, stuff like this, you also express your freedom of expression. You make use of your freedom of expression. Now, and sometimes it is important to see what is the relations. I'm not going to be very technical. Usually the court looks into these two issues together. It considers Article 11 in light of Article 10. So put them together and decides whether the state actually interfered with both of these articles. Another interesting connection is with Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights. I will remind you that Article 9 is the freedom of religion. So what would happen if a religious gathering is prohibited? Yeah, what would happen if, I don't know, some sort of religious march is banned? In this case, the court actually came up with a very curious, although quite artificial criterion. So if this gathering is happening outdoor, yeah, then the court would look into both articles, Article 11 and 9. If it happens indoor or in private space, like if there is a mass, private mass, then this would be considered under Article 9, which is right to freedom of religion. This is a bit artificial from my point of view, but that's how it is at the moment. Okay. Let's move on and say, you remember when we discussed and we read Article 11, we said that the gathering assembly should be peaceful. If this assembly is not peaceful, it would not be covered by Article 11. And we all know that one of the most popular arguments for the governments is to say that a particular gathering is not peaceful and therefore we need to ban it. Now, the European Court of Human Rights stated in the case of Stankov versus Bulgaria that the assembly will not be peaceful if the participants have violent intentions. Now, you can tell me that it's almost impossible to prove that you don't, or you have, or you don't have violent intentions. Now, the European Court of Human Rights said that it is the burden of proof is on the state, so the state should establish that people have these violent intentions. How you can establish that? Well, for example, the I don't know, the organizers of the demonstration would say that, like, we will beat everyone up who is against us. Yeah, that would be clear indication of violent intentions. Usually this is not the case. However, the instances, the episodes of violence on which the organizers have no particular um, control of, so they couldn't control these episodes of violence, they don't turn the whole peaceful assembly into not peaceful. So individual episodes of violence cannot justify complete ban of a particular assembly. The fact that the assembly disturbs the society doesn't necessarily mean that it absolutely uh, gives the state a right to prevent this assembly, right? So when we have an assembly, the road blocking, when the demonstration prevents traffic from going in, this doesn't mean that the assembly is not peaceful. Um, Another issue that is important, and this is, I have already mentioned, that if you have a possibility of violent counter demonstration, yeah, it doesn't mean that your demonstration should be banned, right? It is, then we will talk about some obligations on the side of the state, and this means that the government has an obligation to protect against these counter demonstrations. And as I said, in the case of Alexeyev, banning this demonstration might be considered excessive. Okay. Uh, an interesting and important situation is that an occupation of a church by foreigners, by aliens, without valid resident permits should be considered peaceful if church didn't object to their presence. In this case, in Cisse versus France, the court made these statements. Okay. So that is about the kind of precondition for the court to deal with a particular assembly. So the assembly needs to be peaceful, right? Violent assemblies, they are not covered by Article 11. Having said that, they still can be covered by Article 10, which is right to freedom of expression. Again, as I have already mentioned, in these articles, Article 10 and 11, the state can interfere legally. If we have a violent expression, the state can ban this expression if it is necessary in a democratic society. Okay, I'm hoping that what I'm saying makes sense. Let's then move on. So let's see what obligations the state have. We have established already what quality, what nature of the assembly we should have in order for this assembly to fall within the ambit of Article 11 of the uh, of the European Convention on Human Rights. Now let's discuss what actually is needed. Um, what actually is needed from the state in this respect. First, we will look into the negative obligations. Yeah, I don't know if you have already discussed this issue, uh, but usually in relation to pretty much all articles of the European Convention on Human Rights, you need to you can like the state has two types of obligations: negative and positive. Yeah, negative obligations, they don't have they're not negative in this in the sense that they are bad or anything. No, negative is the character of this obligation, meaning that the state uh, excellent. You have discussed negative and positive obligations. Good. Therefore, I'm not gonna spend more time on that. So, negative obligations under Article 11, um, the state just should avoid doing anything. Yeah, must let assembly happen as planned. Right now, an interesting and important case here is Macedonian organization Ilinden versus Bulgaria. There are quite a few organizations like that, cases like this. This is an organization in Bulgaria of people of Macedonian origin. Like Macedonia is a country bordering Bulgaria, and there is a minority of Macedonians, and they wanted to have this organization and also rally, have a demonstration there. And the court said that what it means to interfere with the rights. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's an outright ban. Yeah, it doesn't need to be banned both legally or de facto, because there are many different tools that the states can resort to when dealing with demonstrations. They can legally ban it, that they create conditions that de facto ban it. But it also includes different restrictions that can be taken before, during, and after the assembly. Yeah, and these measures might be more or less intrusive, and depending on the nature and the quality of this nature and the quality of these restrictions, they may be proportionate or not. So prior ban can have a chilling effect on the persons who intend to participate in the rally. Yeah, and this term chilling effect is important here, right? So we need to make sure that the state doesn't create the circumstances in which the people, the participants of this rally, are prevented, in fact, from participating in the rally. Well, I want to give an example of what is happening in Belarus at the moment, but it is extreme chilling effect. Yeah, when people are tortured, when people are put in prison, when the criminal cases are open in relation to people who do nothing more than protesting peacefully. Yeah, if the European, if Belarus was in the European Court of Human Rights, it would definitely be a violation of Article 11. But even without that, I'm sure that it is a violation of an appropriate article of the Covenant, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Now, sometimes in some cases, a refusal to allow an individual to travel is an interference. Yeah, we know cases and examples when the buses are stopped of participants of a particular rally for various reasons, related and not related to a particular demonstration. And also measures taken by the authorities during a rally, such as dispersal or arrest, etc., they will be considered as interference. And how we can conceptualize situations when the state interferes after the rally. Yeah, this is obvious. For example, initiating criminal proceedings for those who participated in this rally. Okay, let's move on. Yeah, that's exactly what I have already mentioned. Alongside with negative obligations, the state has positive obligations there. And these positive obligations for the first time, I think the court discussed this issue in the context of this article, is the case Plattform Arze für das Leben. My German is not as good as I wished it to be, but I think that this case is called Doctors in Favor for Life or something like this versus Austria. And in this case, the rally was organized by the pro-life doctors, and this rally was disturbed by counter demonstrations. So they were pro-life, and it was classed with a pro-choice demonstration, and you can guess that it was quite a while ago in Austria. Now, obviously, these issues that demonstrations are concerned with can be very sensitive, can be even offensive, right? And so if you feel very strongly about pro-life or pro-choice, this can be difficult. However, it is an obligation on the state. It is an obligation on the state to ensure that demonstrators are able to demonstrate without fear. I can see the question in the chat. Now, well, this is a very good question. The question is related to the legality of a particular rally. Well, the thing is here now, when we this is a classical example of proportionality. So the question is that the rally is not authorized by the law of associations or stuff like this, and then the state is demanding people to disperse. Yeah. Well, we will need to look into various different criteria. Now, we will have to look into the quality of this law, right? And we will need to look into what are the reasons that the state is putting forward for this gathering to be legal, right? Now, peaceful protest is a right. We need to remember that. A peaceful protest is a right. Now, for example, if this peaceful protest is taking place outside a prison, right, or taking place outside a hospital, which can disturb, right, or when we have a situation when, for example, this rally can cause some religious tensions. So, for example, I don't know, some Islamic demonstration is taking place during the, or anti-Islamic demonstration is taking place during the some Islamic holiday or stuff like this. Yeah, in these circumstances, perhaps the state can demand this demonstration to go. However, if it is nothing like that, and the state still demands the demonstration to disperse, then there is a significant chance that the European Court of Human Rights will consider these actions of the state disproportionate. So illegality of a particular gathering for the European Court of Human Rights, as well as for ICCPR, International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, this is not the end of the analysis. It's just the beginning of the analysis. Yeah. And very rarely, the requirement to get an authorization from the state prior to this gathering will be 100% legal from the point of view of the European Convention on Human Rights. So there are different types of authorization. One, you can only inform the government about the rally. That is often quite legal. But the other one is when there should be an active agreement of the states on a particular demonstration. And this is rarely proportionate. I hope that I answered this question. I think we can discuss it in more detail when I finish, but this was very relevant to what we are discussing now. So going back to, excellent. So going back to our positive obligations, well, the state should ensure that people express their opinions, their views without any fear, right? In this particular case, although the court established this positive obligation on the state, the court did not find a violation here because police eventually interfered and they sort of separated the protesters. However, this case is important from the perspective of the principle. Now I need to hurry up. I have to say. But when we talk about positive obligations, the state has quite a large margin of appreciation. Now, please write in the chat if you were told what margin of appreciation is and how it is used in the context of the ECHR. It is less so in the context of UN Human Rights Committee, but for the European Court of Human Rights, the margin of appreciation is one of the key doctrines that is, no, you haven't. Okay, so let me briefly explain you what margin of appreciation is. Now, briefly, it's a very difficult task, I have to say, because I know at least 4 books that were written specifically on the margin of appreciation. So it's a huge concept. Now, margin of appreciation is a scope for the state to make a particular choice within the scope of a particular article. I know that it's very difficult to understand here, but let's imagine, so basically margin of appreciation gives the state an opportunity to make their own choices within the scope of a particular article. So let's say, what example I can give you? The case of one of interesting cases, not relevant to freedom of association. The case is called Vaux versus France, VO. Yeah, In this case, the question that was under the discussion was when life begins. Yeah, what is the moment when life begins? Now, I have to say that in Europe, many different states decide this question differently. In some countries, life begins from the moment of conception. So as soon as fetus is formed, that's it. That's life. In some countries, it's during some periods within pregnancy. In some countries, is when the baby is making the first breath. In some countries, when the baby can function outside the mother's womb, etc., etc. So there are plenty of different moments. So the European Court of Human Rights, when discussing this issue, then in context of right to life, obviously decided that the states can decide for themselves, and that is what margin of appreciation is. So an ability for the state to decide for itself. So although this question kind of falls within the ambit of Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the states are allowed multiple solutions to this question, and that is what margin of appreciation is. In the context of positive obligations, it means that the state can decide what is the best tactics, what is the best strategy in protecting particular demonstration. The court will not say that, like, you have to have 350 soldiers protecting those protesters. No, the state will have to decide for itself how many, what would be the best way. Maybe there is a better way of geographically removing different protests, kind of directions, etc., etc. So the court would allow the state to decide. That is what margin of appreciation is. And margin of appreciation is applicable to positive obligations under any article, negative obligation only in relation to articles which are qualified, which can be restricted. Oh, Jesus Christ, I need to finish soon. And I'm nowhere near the finish. Okay, let's move on. I'm hoping that I'm not boring you to death. If you want me to hurry up, I will. Just let me know. Positive obligations. Now, another question that is very important is whether the states should enforce or make others to tolerate assemblies on their land. So, for example, if I have a field, somewhere in England, in Merseyside, in Liverpool, and somebody wants to have a demonstration on my field, should the state force me to have to allow this demonstration? Well, this question is difficult, and the answer is perhaps mostly no. The case at hand is the case Appleby versus the United Kingdom. This case was on Article 10, which is freedom of expression, but it is useful here. In this case, the applicants, they wanted to distribute leaflets in a shopping center. Shopping center is a private entity. And here we need to have a balance between Article 1 of Protocol 1, which is right to property, and rights of demonstrators to do that. The court said here, first I'll tell the argument that the applicants were pushing forward is that shopping center was effectively the town center in this little town in the United Kingdom, and it was the best place where they could do that. However, the court actually didn't agree with that in this particular case and said that there is no automatic right to access others people's property, for example, for exercise of Article 11. And this right might only happen when, well, the whole town center is occupied by a particular company, for example. Yeah, but again, the threshold here is quite high. You need to effectively be prevented from having a rally or a demonstration uh, in these circumstances. Okay, so as I said, in this case, there was no violation. Let's discuss quickly limits on Article 11. As I said, it's a qualified right. And the court and the convention actually says, I have already written that it's the interest of national security, public safety, prevention, disorder, or crime, protection of health of morals, or protection of rights and freedom of others. Usually, in these cases, the court has broad margin of appreciation, and I have already described it. For example, in the case of Christians against racism and fascism in the UK, and this is quite an old case, the court took into account various conditions and various issues, that there was a threat of violent counter demonstration, the atmosphere was tense, there were riots in the past, and taking all these conditions together, the court found that the ban of this march is not unreasonable. So there was no violation here. But this is a problematic approach, isn't it? So because the atmosphere is tense, this argument is actually in favor of allowing the demonstration. Because these are the times when democracy is most necessary, so to speak. I just wanted to also mention that this was quite an old case, and since then the court actually developed its attitude to demonstration. I'm not going to discuss this case, but for Russian colleagues, the case of Navalny and Russia, the Grand Chamber case of Navalny in Russia is one of the most important cases on Article 11 too. As I said, in recent years, margin has become smaller. It narrowed down. So when margin becomes smaller, the choice that the states are given is shrinking, is becoming smaller. The case that I have already mentioned is Stankov and the United Macedonian organization Ilinden versus Bulgaria. Here we have a ban that is a reaction to the views expressed at demonstrations. And here we had the ban on demonstration of nationalist organization, Macedonian organization. And the court discussed issues of public safety here, because public safety was the key aspect of this case. Now, and the court actually established a test of what the government should actually prove here. Now, first, the government should prove that there were serious disturbances, for example, in the past. And the court again said that risk of minor incidents is not enough, because when you have a public gathering, even if you have, like, let's say some, I don't know, like concert or nightclub gathering, like you can have some violent episodes. When you have plenty of people, you cannot exclude that there are violent episodes. And these minor episodes, they don't change the nature of the demonstration, and actually it triggers the positive obligation of the state to prevent, to react to the proportionately react to this kind of issues. And also, like, sorry, I was too quick to switch the slides. And also, separatist ideas themselves cannot automatically justify the ban. Of course, if you are in favor of violent departure of a particular area of the states, that might be appropriate to ban, but ideas of autonomy, etc., would not be enough. Then that is actually all I wanted to talk about assemblies, assemblies, and we move quickly to freedom of association. That is a wonderful question that I just see in on the slide on in chat about COVID-19 and freedom of assembly. You will see that I have this question and as one of the discussion points at the end of my lecture. So I know that this is the most pressing question, and this is fantastic that you asked this question. It is a bit on the surface, I have to admit. I have to say that okay, well, let's discuss it at the end of our lecture, and I would like to know your views on that before I tell mine. And the second question, the second question is about whether it is possible, it is possible to prioritize protection of health as opposed to freedom of association. I want to know your views first. I will definitely tell you what I think about that, but I want to know what you think. Now, give me 10 more minutes. Can I have 10 more minutes? And we will move to these particular questions. And but before that, I would love to finish freedom of association, which is thank you, which is not something that is less interesting. I will, Daniil, I will definitely come back to your question. What is association, right? I told you that association is an entity that is formed by individuals, and the court is actually quite quite liberal, so to speak, into deciding what sort of association we can discuss. And it is a bearer of, an association is bearer of its fundamental rights. So, for example, a party or a non-governmental organization can itself bring a complaint to the European Court of Human Rights. Yeah, we will see that in a couple of minutes. And for example, Article 11 doesn't give individuals a right to join a particular association, so that can be something that is decided by association. And it needs to be stable. It doesn't need necessarily to be registered, so to speak. Yeah, so non-registered organizations also would fall under this definition, but it needs not to be sporadic, so to say, right? People who gathered for some rally, they are not an association. Yeah. There is a positive freedom here, that it's right to form an association, so everyone can form an association, but also a negative freedom. It's right not to join an association. If you don't want to join an association, you cannot be forced to join that. So, for example, there were a couple of cases against France where some landowners had to join the Association of Hunters. Yeah, one of the applicants, he didn't want to join this association. He didn't like hunting, and he didn't want. And the court found that there is a right not to join an association here. So what are the limitations that are set out in Article 11.11.2? The same as limitations that we have already discussed in relation to freedom of assembly. Yeah. And in this particular part of the lecture, we will deal with political parties. Yeah. And I will only talk about two cases. So it will literally take me 5-7 minutes. And I want to show you the difference between two cases. And the first case is the case of United Communist Party versus Turkey. And the second case is the case called Refah Partisi versus Turkey, which is a party that is called Welfare Party versus Turkey. Let me see. The first one is United Communist Party versus Turkey. Yeah. The court has clearly emphasized that political parties are crucial for democracy. Yeah. The court said that political parties are essential to proper functioning of democracy, and this is clear. Democracy depends on pluralism, so there should be plenty of parties that reflect different views in society. Like freedom of expression, and I know that you have already had a lecture on freedom of expression, and the European Court of Human Rights, in a number of cases, said that expression can shock, disturb, or offend, and nevertheless it would be protected. It is still protected by Article 11. And political parties represent different shades of opinion to be found within the country's population. Now, let's move on. What was the problem with the Communist Party? So how the state can outlaw a particular party? In the United Communist Party versus Turkey, the government argued that the party is called communists, and communism for them would be an opposite to democracy. And the second argument was that this party was trying to divide the Turkish nation. And the reason was because in the party's manifesto, they mentioned the Kurdish nation, which is a very sensitive issue in Turkey. Now, the court discussed this issue and said that what the Turkish authorities were trying to do, they were trying to actually say that they banned United Communist Party. Of course, I had to mention that. So they dissolved this party, and they wanted to argue that this actually falls within Article 11, subsection 2. The court replied to these arguments and said that those exceptions that are in Article 11, paragraph 2 should be construed strictly. And only convincing and compelling reason can justify restriction. And there should be, although the state has margin of appreciation in assessing the proportionality of interference, there should be rigorous European supervision of a very limited margin. Now let's see what it means in practice in this particular case. The court said that communist in the name itself is not sufficient to justify the solution. It's too drastic, it's too disproportionate. And the second argument that the state actually put forward about dispersion, about the fact that division of the Turkish nation, the court said that, well, uh, this issue should be discussed. Yeah, it's not necessarily um the reason to ban a particular party, and the party actually asked for a dialogue rather than pushing for a particular agenda. So in this case, the court found a violation. Uh, However, now let's compare it with the second case, this case of Refah Party C versus Turkey. Now, I want to mention that United Communist Party was a marginal party. It was a very small party in Turkey. Yeah, never managed to get into parliament or anything like that. Yeah, as opposed to that, Refah Partisi was a huge party. Yeah, it had 22% of vote. It was one of the most popular parties in the country. Yeah, and it was very successful at a regional level. However, at some, I don't want to um, spoil the result of this case, but I have to say that in this case, why I show this case as a different, as an opposite to the United Communist Party, is because in this case the court did not find the violation. In other words, the fact that Turkey banned this party was okay from the point of view of the European Convention on Human Rights, even despite the fact that it was so popular. Now, let's see. It was banned by the Constitutional Court of Turkey for the following reasons. It's because it was an Islamist party. It made calls for abolition of secularism and principle as a principle of Turkish constitution. You probably remember that this is one of the um key aspects of Turkish democracy, coming from Atatürk, etc. And they also called for Quran to replace law, if necessary, by means of force. That's what uh, reason, the reasons for this ban were. The court did consider this case from the point of view of the principles that were laid down in United Communist Party. It again reiterated that a party may promote a change in the law by legal means. You remember that they were in favor of dialogue, etc. And the change itself should be comparable and compatible with the fundamental principles of democracy. So the court actually said that if a party is using democracy to come to overturn democracy, to get rid of democracy, the court cannot protect this particular party. Let me elaborate a little bit on this issue. So as I said, the party cannot use rights guaranteed by Article 10 and 11 to destroy the rights and freedom of the ECHR. And the representatives of the party said that it's not necessarily in the official party program that they want to achieve these aims, but the court actually took into account what the representatives of the party, the leaders of the party, actually talk about, and the court also established that the party must present a danger to democracy at the moment of its dissolution. And let's see how these principles are applied to the situation at hand. So this party was becoming increasingly successful, and it would have a real chance of implementing its anti-democratic program. You can say, look, the fact that the party is successful is not necessarily the reason for it to be dissolved. Quite to the contrary. However, the court actually took into account its anti-democratic agenda. Speeches of the party leaders were taken into account, and they were very much anti-democratic in their nature. And the fact that Sharia law was incompatible with the democracy, and also, like, just to wrap up with this issue, is it did call for use of force, which is also not particularly useful for democracy. And therefore, there was a pressing social need for ban of this party, and the ban was considered proportionate. So I'm not saying that this case is an absolutely correct. You can have your view on that. My students usually are quite divided into that, especially when they compare with United Communist Party now. But at the moment, this is how the European Court of Human Rights deals with this particular dilemma. Okay, I think that we are done with the me talking, right? I want to turn to some questions for discussion. I will leave them on the slide, and we can have them as inspiration, so to speak. And that's a very good question. Whether online meetings fall under the term of assembly? Well, I wonder how the state can interfere with this right. Whether they would join the Zoom meeting and block it, it's difficult to say. Well, we need to think from the point of view of interference. However, well, I have to say that there is no case law on that issue. The European Court of Human Rights, as far as I know, has never dealt with this. But why not? The court was quite liberal in relation to the definitional part. Why not? Like, it's difficult to see how you interfere. Yes, you probably can interfere by blocking a particular um, websites, etc. And obviously, if the state is blocking a website, it would be interference, but rather with freedom of expression. I think that this would probably be an issue under Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, rather Article 11. I feel that for Article 11, you need to have some physical representation of assembly rather than just online. However, well, I don't know. There is no case law. Well, this is a very quickly area in which developments are very, very rapid, and we might see in a couple of years some cases that deal with this. Now, my questions, and they are just inspirational. As I said, ta-da! The first question is exactly related to what Daniil has just asked me a couple of minutes ago. It's does COVID-19 pandemic impact the rights under Article 11? My second inspirational question is, in what cases do you think that a political party or an NGO should be banned? Yeah, it is related to what we have just discussed. And finally, how should the state react to violent demonstrations? And what are the extent of, what is the extent of violence that the state can actually use? Now, the floor is effectively yours, and I will switch into Russian so we can have a more meaningful discussion. Yeah, да. Я надеюсь, что мы сейчас...
I hope that
будет для переводчиков легко
well, I hope that's okay for interpreters as well. If I switch into Russian, but I think that's going to facilitate our discussion. I think we have 20 minutes or so, or 30.
Моя Siri пытается со мной поговорить.
That's my Siri talking to me.
Если у вас есть вопросы,
If you have any questions, that would be great to hear them. It would be good if you turn your video on. It would be good to take a look at you, because when I see these black boxes, it's very difficult to talk to black screen. So we remember the questions that I asked, and I will just stop sharing my screen, and we'll just have a conversation with you. On top of your screen, you have a red button, stop sharing. So that's the one that you need to use. See how many people responded to my encouragement to turn your cameras on. Thank you very much for that. Hi again. So it's nice to see all of you again. Okay, so we can be guided by anarchy at the moment. So whoever wants, just to go ahead and talk. Daniel asked this question that re-echoed my question. So let's start with that one. What do you think? COVID-19, did it have any impact on anything? Well, in this regard, I mean, good evening. Can you hear me? I didn't turn my camera on. It's just more convenient for me. Let me provide a little bit of context for my question. What degree of restriction can be seen there? Yes, well, since I participate in the courts, yesterday there was a decision made to limit the right to assembly, to picketing just due pandemic. Well, that's excessive, because when you talk about picketing, it's just one person. It's not a mass of people that we see there. It's just one person who took out to the streets with the picketing. So what are the conditions or requirements for this type of restrictions to be considered adequate and proportionate? What do you think of that? Hard to say. On the one hand, if we talk about conscientious citizens, so they wear masks, so they wear gloves, so they sort of abide by pandemic restrictive requirements. Whether it's effective or not, well, that's another question. But, well, anyway, so people, when they take out to the streets with picketing, so they abide by restrictions with masks and gloves. So if they do follow this type of quarantine restrictions and social distancing rules, then I think that's okay. It should be authorized. Any other ideas? What do you think, Alexander? Hi. I think a lot depends on the number of positively tested cases in the country. If the situation is dangerous and we see a lot of people dying on a daily basis, then we need to resort to modern measures of disseminating or imparting information, and organize assembly using Zoom platform, and you can broadcast it using national TV channels, for instance, and then you would disseminate information anyways widely, and it would be similar in terms of the way you disseminated it, as if it were a large gathering downtown. I'm just making it up on the move, but that's a wonderful story. Yeah, wonderful. And if the situation with the pandemic is not that bad, then I agree that while individual protective measures required by quarantine should be observed for the picketing. Okay, anybody else, please?
ВТ у нас будет еще не такое. Андрей, по-моему.
Maybe somewhere in Belarus of the future, we will have this reality. Well, dear colleagues, I would like to share my experience. I had a case where my client was detained at a rally because he didn't wear the mask. He had to serve 5 days in detention because he disobeyed the police, and also he was fined financially for this participating in protesting during the pandemic. So we need to punish people either for their behavior during the rally or due to going beyond restrictions of the pandemic. I believe that that was excessive or abuse of power. Well, okay, here we have something in the chat. If in Ukraine there is no procedure for massive assembly, it is possible to come together, having informed the authorities 24 hours in advance. Is it narrowing of the right if they adopt the law that settles these issues of organizing rallies and assemblies, and for example, to set the limit of like 24 hours before the rally? Now let's continue speaking about COVID context. Well, I don't know if I'm responding your question now. I just have this idea now. I'm now in Germany, and here the approach that they practice is that the rally that is planned is the authorities are pre-notified, they delineate the territory, and they discuss also, they set a certain number of people that would be allowed to be in that territory. And of course, PPEs are supposed to be used. And I believe that I can hardly imagine that it applies in Belarus, for example, but where the state is in the position to protect citizens and where the state offers these conditions, I believe that this is a good practice because the state doesn't interfere on the one hand. On the other hand, they do protect those who wish to participate and those who wish or do not wish and to interact with those people who participate in the event. Well, that's a great method. Sure. Any other ideas about that? I would like to share. I cannot activate my camera because my internet is too weak. But speaking about the coronavirus, I live in Ukraine, and actually here it is possible to organize rallies without warning, like 5 hours or 24 hours in advance, and warning the authorities, in my understanding. It is about like coordinating the like services like police or the ambulance if needed, because if they plan counter events, etc. But in Ukraine, in social media and in the streets, there was the problem that when they prohibited a certain number of people to come together outside to have this kind of peaceful assemblies, people were apprehensive of that the authority would take advantage of that and make some decisions that would go counter to the opinion of a significant proportion of people. So when it was prohibited to come together in March for a large number of people in social media, people expressed their dissatisfaction because the authorities could secretly make some decision, prohibit people from protesting, and Speaking about one protest demonstration, I believe that in Ukraine this is not a problem. It can be done at any time because you can hardly actually kind of infect yourself. Well, that's a good comment. And this aspect of using the pandemic as an excuse for the state, well, that's something that is very much relevant today, sure. For example, in European countries, there is a chance that the restrictions that are introduced during for the period of the pandemic, that they will stay with us after the pandemic as well, as if it is a good excuse for the state to introduce a limitation and then to go on with that. However, we have this great article, Article 18 of the European Convention for Human Rights, according to which any limitations of human rights need to be introduced for the purpose as planned. Maybe you know, I see that most of people here are young, and that's good. But maybe some of you remember the Russian oligarch Gusinsky. He owned a Russian TV company, and TV, it has the same name now, but back then it was a very different, broadcaster. So back then, so to put it, well, he was deprived of that broadcasting company, in which way he was detained for non-payment of taxes, and as soon as he passed over his share, his participation in the broadcaster to Gazprom, he was quickly released. And why I mentioned that? In that case, the European Court confirmed, agreed that he was actually detained not because not because of tax evasion. Maybe he did not pay taxes, but actually he was arrested to deprive him of that broadcaster ownership, and using limitation of human rights for those nasty purposes is not good. So the European Court deemed that as violation of Article 18, and after that, post-Soviet countries became a very, so to say, useful or rich source to develop Article 18 of the European Convention, because there are so many cases like that. Ukraine has really developed this article, and that was Tymoshenko and Lutsenko versus Ukraine. All of us know these cases. Khodorkovsky versus Russia, Mamadov versus Azerbaijan, Merabishvili versus Georgia. All of those cases are about Article 18 of the European Convention. Mostly it is where people were detained, arrested, not for what they arrested for, but because of their political activities. Belarus cases, Babarik, Tikhanovska, etc. Everything was absolutely under Article 18. But we are distracted a little bit. That's an interesting and important topic, that states can use COVID-19 in order to pursue their own interests. But maybe some of you would like to add something more if we speak about limitations in the context of the pandemic. And after that, I will try to share my ideas about that. You can raise your hand there. Ms. Salome Tsereteli, you can speak now.
Hi, I will speak in English.
By all means.
Okay. Sorry, I cannot turn on my camera because of internet problem. I don't know what happens, but I will speak. Hi, I'm Salome Tsereteli, and I'm from Georgia. And I'm activist too. And this COVID-19 case is very, very difficult for us, for activists, because when something goes wrong, our government uses it to reduce our power and our if we want to protest something, we cannot go outside, but still we manage it because, as you know, like few weeks ago in Georgia we had elections, and I'm not proud the fact that our elections was rigged, and we had in Tbilisi massive protests, and our government used its power to arrest people, to damage our bodies, and so on. And now we have lockdown again, and we cannot protest in massive. We cannot organize massive protests because our government has all power to arrest us. But still, I think we still manage it. But it's very important, like foreign countries to just give attention to us and help us, like our foreign friends, because we alone, only human rights protesters, we cannot just only stand by ourselves, because if we do not get help from foreign friends, it's impossible to just manage to build democratic country. So it's quite difficult situation now, and I'm also read and watch the situation what is in Belarus now, and all Belarusians who are here, I really hope that soon you will get what you want for your country, and good luck everyone. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Really, really good interference, and I agree that Georgia is an interesting case, isn't it? Georgia, as far as I remember, um, uh, derogated from the European Convention on Human Rights. Georgia also declared a state of emergency during the during the first lockdown, so to speak. And obviously, obviously we cannot say that every single measure in that respect is a violation of human rights. We need to be, we need to apply the principle of proportionality there. And this is what I wanted actually to tell you in general, that principle of proportionality is extremely important for these cases. And the state needs to act consistently, right? I saw that somebody mentioned I saw that somebody mentioned that in Belarus there is no COVID-19, and therefore you don't need to use COVID-19. Well, basically, if Belarusian state started using COVID-19 specifically for opposition rallies, that would not be it would not be proportionate, right? So this is a problem. What is proportionality in this respect? Proportionality is, first, we need to see what arguments the state actually trying to justify its interference, and what those arguments might be. First, of course, we have to see the impact of the pandemic on people, right? How it spreads, etc., etc. That's very important, yeah, because indeed, if people are dying as a result of the pandemic, the state can legitimately restrict the freedom of association, even when we know that people will be responsible and they would wear masks, etc. The state can say that it is we cannot take the risks, yeah. And in the United Kingdom, for example, there was a lockdown, so people could not gather outside at all, yeah. And I think that in the middle of pandemic, the European Court of Human Rights would accept this as legal, as proportionate, because it clearly goes in favor of protection of people's health. And pandemic is the most unprecedented challenge for Europe, for the world. Yeah, therefore the scope of margin of appreciation will be huge. Having said that, this scope is not all-encompassing. It doesn't mean that the state can do anything they want, justifying these actions by pandemic, using pandemic. The court will look into the justifications. First, the court will look if it is a one-person demonstration, how is it actually possible to infect anyone, as somebody said? Of course, not possible. If there are some reasons for prohibition of this sort of expression, then we need to know these reasons. But also the court will see if the punishment is proportionate, right? When somebody said that the applicant or the client of this person was arrested and put in prison, where he was exposed probably to even more risk of being infected than being on his own on the streets, then this will be disproportionate, right? It is very important to see how this proportionality works, right? Окей, я не знаю, почему я начал говорить по-английски. Ну,
I
вот,
don't know why now I speak English. Well,
Там несколько интересных
there are
комментариев.
several interesting comments in the chat. By the way, I wanted to share an interesting case. I don't remember, I have forgotten the name of it. It starts with S, versus Ukraine. Maybe the Ukrainian colleagues know this case. It is about the this eggs and the visit to the memorial. This is also about freedom of expression. Can you remind me the surname of the applicant? So, and she was at this memorial with the eternal, so-called eternal fire, and she fried eggs on it, and she had to spend like 2 or 3 months in pre-detention facility. And in that case, the European Court said that interference into this freedom of expression is technically possible. However, the punishment where she went to kind of fry eggs on the memorial and then she spent 3 months in pre-detention facility, that was too much. So proportionality of punishment, Sinkova, this is her surname, thank you. This is Sinkova versus Ukraine. I remember that it started with S. And in that case, that was partial violation as ruled by court. So it is not about interference, but it was about punishment, that the punishment was disproportionate. Okay, and we had another question here about 2334. Well, right, Belarus is a separate story. Milica Stankovic says that about the third question, about how the state, whether the state can apply violence against Protestants. I wouldn't say that it is not possible to apply violence against Protestants, unfortunately, because protests differ. Some protests may be very violent. And there, In this case, this is duty of the state to limit the damage or to limit the riots. In that case, the state may apply effective measures. But this is about the limit of application of violence. Daniel, would you like to comment on that? Well, I can say a couple of words. As far as I know, in European countries, in some of them at least, there is such standard where if violence is applied to protestants when there are some violent actions, it must be applied above all to stop the rally, but not to damage or hurt people. So it needs to be minimized.
That's the only thing I can add. Quite right, fully agree with you. Naturally, the purpose of violence shouldn't be causing bodily injuries. The only goal of proportionate violence should be terminating, for instance, if you are taking custody of people who smash cars, you can resort to some kind of force to stop them. But this force should be in absolute proportion to what they are doing. So that's the argument. So proportionality, that's the key approach of the European Court, and generally that's the approach to be governed by in these instances when it comes to the measures undertaken by the state. If there's pandemic, so the government could do and should do more. So the higher risk, the higher threat is, the more the government can require. So that's the way it works. That's the mechanism in this regard. And proportionality principle, as I said, is a key principle with respect to Article 8, 9, 11. So the entire group of these articles is just the type of articles that when the court is weighing out, on one scale is health, on the other is individual right. So what is more important in this particular case, in this particular instance? The chat says that well, it is clearly also stated in the regulation what kind of arms the law enforcement can use against peaceful rallies. Anastasia, there was a project in Ukraine that monitored peaceful assembly in Ukraine. So how the authorities exercise their positive obligations for a peaceful assembly to be conducted. So there are recommendations. Well, the OSCE Human Rights Monitoring Mission, or DIR, monitor that based on the criteria. Well, so they identify the violations based on the criteria, and they have with respect to Ukraine and quarantine, there are limitations when it comes to the meetings of several people. So the number of people was subject to restriction. Let's say in the car, there should be no more than this many people, where, well, you can't have the gathering of a large group of people in the park. But if you took to the street to express your opinion or your protest against it, then you have the right to do that, because state of emergency and emergency situation are different things. We had a state of emergency and it doesn't restrict peaceful assembly. But if it is public emergency, then this restriction is in place. That's a strange scene when you can't walk in the park in a group of people, but you can come out in the same number of people to protest. You're allowed. Well, that's the goal that you're pursuing. In other words, nobody can forbid you to express your opinion. So that was the reasoning behind it. Well, I don't know. I think that the European court wouldn't find violation when it comes to the second part of it. I fully agree with you on the first part of it. If that's one person who came out to protest and the water guns are used against this lonely person there, and then that's going to be disproportionate. If that's just five persons protesting and there are 30 police men who are battering people with batons, then it's disproportionate too. It all depends on the case in hand. Well, the comment on Russia, emergency situation was not introduced, but people are fined all the time. Well, the reasons behind these fines, well, you need to take a look at a specific situation. The government or the state may introduce not the state of emergency, but it could be just, ordinary law, but the fine could be imposed under this law. For instance, intentional spread of infectious disease. Well, it doesn't require the state of emergency position. Moreover, state of emergency does not allow for the state to do whatever it pleases. There is Article 15 of the European Convention of Human Rights that speaks of derogation.
От Европейской конвенции.
Derogation from the European Convention, and it clearly establishes measures that you apply for derogation, they should be directly and explicitly linked with the nature of state of emergency. So Article 15 says that derogation does not allow for the carte blanche for the state. So state of emergency is, yeah, exactly. Article 15 doesn't speak about the time limit here, but the very idea behind derogation or behind restriction is to create quarantine for quarantine. So, in other words, the new norms can be applied only to counter and address the issue that cropped up and triggered these measures. I don't know whether it was clear or not what I was trying to say. I have an article actually that I recently published on the measures that can be applied during the COVID-19 pandemic. What else do we have in the chat? Maybe somebody else questions, comments, suggestions, because our time is running out. Otherwise, I'll be expelled by the organizers. No, everything's fine. You are fine yet. Wonderful. It's good that we have time for Q&A. I think that's exactly what we need all the time, and we always lack it. So that's the chance. What else did we have on the chat? I'm just trying to scan it. There was the answer to question 3. Yeah, I did mention it. With respect to Ukraine, Yarina Voloshin, what if they limited 24 hours? Bukhta versus Bulgaria. There was an interesting judgment, and I guess they had the national law that established the 3-day time frame for notification about the assembly, but it was a spontaneous protest.
Заключение.
Да, заключение суда. Вот,
And the court concluded and covered in the conclusion the issue raised by Yaron. Spontaneous, well, that's a separate story. Well, it wasn't quite spontaneous, impromptu one, but they didn't have enough time, so they learned about the visit of the consular one day before the visit, so they couldn't meet this time frame requirement. Indeed, the conclusions of the court depend on the specific facts and circumstances of the case. If the government, if the state requires too much, that is impossible to implement, then the European Court at the very first stage of proportionality test, the court would say that this restriction is not provided for by the law given European Convention of Human Rights, because the law should be adequate and proportionate. If you say that you need to notify about the assembly, about the gathering 4 months in advance, so in essence, it doesn't allow for doing this in practice. So you have to remember about proportionality. You have to remember about this chilling effect phenomenon, so that people could have a real chance to express their protests, for instance, with something. So that's the story. Bukta versus Hungary, not Bulgaria, sorry. Dear colleagues, unless you have any other interesting questions. What was the second question you asked? I can't remember now. What are the instances when the state can ban political parties and NGO? Well, we didn't cover that. Well, the state banned political parties in Russia. I remember it was regional or Republican Party versus Russia. That was the case where the court found a violation. In many countries, political parties were banned. But it doesn't mean, however, that it's not allowed to ban parties. Do you agree with the Refah Partisi case? Would you support Turkey in this case? Well, the party seemed to promote jihad. Okay, I guess people are tired. Well, it's late. It's almost 5 p.m. In Liverpool, and it should be late in your countries. Thank you very much indeed for this dialogue. Ideology of hatred. Well, hate speech and ideology of hatred, it's good examples. If I say that all Belarusians should be expelled from England because they are destructive for the country and they divide the country, then that's going to be a problem. Okay, dear colleagues, shall we start saying goodbye to each other or what? So I'm asking organizers, what's the plan? Do you have any questions? No, I think we can conclude here because you might be tired. You've had almost 2-hour session. Thank you very much indeed for being with us today. And thank you for having agreed to be an expert. You see the response from the participants. Hopefully, we'll see more of you at our sessions. So thank you very much indeed for your lecture. I think we can stop recording here, and I'll cover a couple of organizational issues